Well, welcome to this session on language tagging. We decided or offered this session on the basis that there were a number of people who didn't quite understand what language tagging was about and what's this ISO 639? Well, we don't know what ISO 639 is, but why are you talking about language tags when we want to talk about ISO 639? So we thought we'd do a session on what are language tags and why are they important and what does it do with ISO 639 and how can you add a non-existent language to it. So, you know, we'll have a bit of fun. So, the boring bit first, what is a language tag? A language tag is a string, it's a short identifier. It's a thing you can use to identify something about a language data. You try and keep them as short as possible, but they're structured so that you can break down a tag into its component bits and work out, just by looking at a tag, quite a lot of information about the data that's being tagged. It's flexible, you can extend it, you can express to the level of detail you want the information about the language and the script and the region and everything about the source of that, the text that's being tagged in regard to language. And it's readable by human and machine. It's always interesting to try and make something that's readable by both humans and machines, and you never quite achieve both perfectly. But this is one of those compromise cases. So a language tag typically consists of a 3-letter code, which is the ISO 639 code. That's why ISO 639 is important. That's really the only reason why ISO 639 is important, because they're used in language tags. People seem to think that ISO 639 is something special on its own. It's not. Its real value in the industry is because it's used in language tags. So ISO 639 code here, followed by, I'm going to rattle off these numbers here because I remember them and it's quite fun to impress people. This is the script code, it's a 4-letter code, ISO 15924. And then we have a 2-letter region tag, usually in capitals. That's from ISO 3166-1 Alpha 2. And then we have various variants that are registered and extensions. We're going to go through this in more detail, so we're going to break this down so you understand with an example what that's all about. Okay, so what use are language tags? Well, they allow language resources to be associated with some text. So you've got some text, you tag it with a language tag, and then a computing process system can go to that and go, oh, I know what that language is, I can help you. I can provide a spelling dictionary, or a keyboard, or a font, or whatever it is, just based on knowledge about the tagging of that text. So you don't have to be constantly thinking about presentation, you can just be thinking about what is the language of this text. And of course, it's equally used to identify those language resources. And there's a whole system, excuse me, I'm just fighting this cable here. They tied it up, didn't they? Hey! There you go. There's a whole system of thing called a locale. Locale information includes all sorts of stuff, which I will come on to in a second. Here we go with, so, where are language tags used? Well, pretty much any time you type something in with a keyboard on a modern computer, they are tagging that text according to the keyboard that you use. So they're putting a language tag in there. Even if it's a complete lie, they're tagging it. So when you go in your word processor and say select language, you're setting a language tag. When you actually select a keyboard on your computer, language tag. Even on Android, language tag. It's also used for data sets. So say, for example, you were doing a survey and you had a whole bunch of data sets. You could use a language tag just to tag those data sets and to say, well, it's actually this language in this region, and this dialect, in this sub-region, and we'll show how refined you can really get if you want to, using a language tag. And also, it's used in the industry incredibly for localization. That's what they're really big into. So for example, if you're watching a video and you want some subtitles, it's a language tag that selects the appropriate subtitles for you. You tag them by language. The locale information gives you information about currency, how numbers are displayed, how currency is displayed, how dates are displayed, even how you describe a language in a particular language. They usually have that information in locale. So the locale information that the computing industry is collecting is increasingly providing more and more information for localization. Okay, so if you want to learn more, we've been going on about this thing document called BCP 47, Best Common Practice 47. they wrote this document because there's two big standards organizations in the world. There's ISO, which you've heard of, and then there's the Internet Engineering Task Force, IETF, and they set all the standards for what actually happens on the internet. So they're the guys who've come up with language tags. And they kept changing, each time you do a new revision of one of these standards, which they call requests for comments, RFCs, you don't just stick a new number on it and say it's revised. You get a completely new number. And they were changing this thing so fast that everybody got bored and said, just give us one place where we know we're getting the latest, and that is BCP 47. And it brings together all the standards and information about language tagging. It's a stultifyingly boring document, but you need to read it. Skip the boring bits, but it's a standard. And the nature of standards is they're boring because they have to be precise and they have to have all the information in there. And that's, if you want to know what it, you can say to someone, please tell me about BCP 47, and they'll tell you some stuff. And you say, well, what about this? You say, go and read BCP 47. It's fairly well structured. You can skip all the boring bits, get to the bits you want. And then there's various ISO standards which I just rattled off before, 639 for language codes, 15924 for script, and 3166 for regions. And then I also talked about locale information. Unicode, the Unicode Consortium is running a project called the Common Locale Data Repository, CLDR, and they are holding lots of locale information for more and more languages, again using language tags. Okay, so.
Okay, well, hang on a minute.
Yes. We're not linguists though, how can we do a survey?
I have no idea, but people often say that they don't understand me when I talk, and like I was listening to that and I didn't understand much of that either. So,
well, we better do a survey, hadn't we, to find out.
Yeah. So
for your region.
Let's give this a go. Like, let's take an example, like something I know about, like myself.
Okay. Yes. So you know something about yourself. That's good.
So we'll take a survey with a sample size, something meaningful, a sample size of 1.
Yes. Well, that's going to be very accurate.
Right. Okay. So what do we do?
Well, first of all, we have to decide how we're going to tag your language, because you're going to give us some data. We're going to tag it. Yes.
I actually speak English.
Okay. You speak English. Okay. So we start out by there's a very simple language code. We're saying it's English, not saying anything else. It's English, and there we are. The tag starts with an ISO 639 code, and you'll notice it's only got 2 letters. It's not ISO 639-3, it's ISO 639-2, because -2 takes precedence over -3. So if there's a 2-letter code, you use the 2-letter code, not the 3-letter code. See, it's all designed to confuse you. Nothing straightforward. It's all little things to confuse you. Anyway, for English, you just have 2-letter code, EN. Okay, you can press the arrow key too. There you go. Right. After that, we have the script, and the script is going to be Latin, because we write with Latin letters. Very important in this part of the world, the script, again from 15924. But they said, well, you don't need to write the script. And in fact, we know that English is always written in Latin script, so therefore you can suppress it. In other words, for certain languages, and only 2-letter codes have this facility, you don't need the script code.
Right, well, I don't know Latin anyway, so if we
that's
suppress that, that's all good.
So now...
So we're back to...
Hang on, so you speak English. Do you speak the same English as me? Because you said you didn't understand me.
I definitely do not speak the same English.
No, so where's your English from then?
Oh, my English is from the land of the long white cloud, Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Ah, okay, so we're going to put a region tag on to say that it's New Zealand English. Now, the full tag will be EN Latin New Zealand, but we can drop the Latin, so we're now EN NZ. Okay, so we're just using ISO standards here. There's no choice. You have to abide by those standards for these bits. Great. Okay, we've gotten down to New Zealand. But we're doing a whole survey. Well, how are we going to write this stuff, really?
Well, I think we should use IPAs.
We're good linguists, we should use IPA.
I mean, if we just wrote it in English, we'd have to decide whether it was like American spelling or
exactly.
English spelling.
So we're going to write, because we're collecting phonetic information, we need to write it in IPA. So it's not really Latin script, it's IPA. And they've added a special variant, for you to indicate that this stuff is in IPA. And you stick on the variant code, FON IPA, or FONIPA as Campbell likes to call it.
That's my New Zealand English coming
there you go.
In New Zealand English, we call it FONIPA.
And that tells you that this text is in IPA. So it's New Zealand English in IPA. But we're doing the whole of New Zealand. So
yeah, hang on. Like New Zealand is like quite a big place, from my perspective. So if we're doing a study inside of New Zealand,
All of 2 islands, yes.
yes, but there's people in Auckland that speak quite differently from the rest of us. There's people far down south that speak very differently again.
Dear.
So if we want to explore this,
So we're going to have to.
how are we going to tag
We're going to have to. So we want to tag it a little bit more refined than just New Zealand. So at this point, we start getting clever because the tagging system doesn't have an automatic thing for doing sub-regions. Because you may not actually be interested in it, and they haven't added it. So we're going to use a private use extension. So we stick an X in. It says, I'm now at private use stuff. That's what the X says. And then we can make up, we put anything we like after that. Absolutely anything. So we're going to make up our own system. And I decided, well, we'll put a REG for region, and then we'll put the code that is in ISO 3166-2, because I'm lazy. I'll go and get somebody else's ontology. And we will break down New Zealand into bits, chop, 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 chop.
Actually, we would just say that using other people's ontologies is actually a best practice.
Oh, it's definitely a good thing to do, because be lazy. Definitely, be lazy as you can be. And use, so, TKI is the region code for?
Taranaki.
Taranaki, which is where you're from, is that right?
Yes.
Good, so we decided we'll get them down to Taranaki. But we can do better than that even. So if you press the next one. We decided, well, actually, there's another ontology out there called HASC, which you can get us down to the town level. And actually, Campbell is from New Plymouth in
yes.
Taranaki. So TKNP is the official code for that from this HASC ontology list. So we've decided we'll change it. We'll has C, TKNP, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4,
okay, but
7, 8, so we're okay.
What we could do is we can actually do a survey of the people inside my hometown.
We could, but I'm actually not that interested, because people in who've done surveys of New Zealand have decided that actually not necessarily it's about region. When you're doing a survey, you actually want to look at social economic groups.
Okay.
So let's cut it another way. Let's cut the pie a completely different way. We're going to do it in a social economic group. Now, according to the list that I found in some random paper while spending 5 minutes researching this, I found that Campbell, having his tertiary degree but no PhD because nobody will give him one, is only in social economic group number 2. So we've decided we'll put in the tag for XSEG2. Well, that's got him into a broad social economic group, but actually we can be a little bit more refined than that, because we can be. We can go down, right down to the occupation level, and before Campbell existed, he was a railway engineer. Did you know that? No. Hey, so you learn something new every day. And there is an occupation code system that statisticians use, and the code 53-4011 is railway engineer. So, we can mark and we can do surveys of different occupations and find out what kinds of language they use. Alright, and then we can combine the lot. And we can say that we want to be so precise. We want to do region and economic group, and we want the intersection of all of these. I mean, this is getting silly. You wouldn't do this. Please don't do this. This just gets a little bit silly. But we thought we'd make the point by being very silly. So we've decided that there's this person who's from New Plymouth, who's a railway engineer and has a tertiary degree. Well, there's only 50,000 people in New Plymouth, so the odds on are we have tagged Campbell. He is now voluntarily tagged, we've identified him, and any data from now on that we tag like that is known to be spoken by Campbell. But you see, if we did the same thing and did it for me in Reading, England, and it was software engineers in social economic group 2, you'd probably have about 1,000. So it doesn't necessarily get you down to one person. And if you really wanted to do one person, you could just do -X name Campbell.
So the thing to really take away from this is you want to use the shortest tag possible that unambiguously describes the group that you're investigating. So, for example, if you're comparing English and French, you could use EN compared with FR as a very general case. And you can forget all that. Yeah. But if you are actually doing a dialectal variation study and you're looking at studies within a country, you're going to need something a little bit longer that will give you more distinction, so that you can say that we're comparing English as spoken in New Plymouth versus English as spoken in Auckland, New Zealand. Right? So the shortest unambiguous tag is really what you're after.
Okay. So what use of these private use extensions, which I would encourage you to use in your data, because they are useful for small user communities. Very often, a linguist is their own user community. they're the only one who's really working on their data, especially if they're doing survey data. They're the only one who's really cranking different dialects or different, and trying to refine it down to work out something else. So small user communities, not separated by space and time, so they can communicate and they understand what they mean by this private use tag. The great thing about them is you don't need to register them with anybody. You can use one today, because you can put anything you like in there. It can be whatever you want. And the system will cater to that. It will say, oh yes, I know to ignore this. I know that this is something that only you know about, and that's fine. And I will use all the rest of the stuff. So it's a very good structured flexibility. So I encourage you, if you don't know what you're doing, you need an extra thing inside your tag, use the private use tag. Now, when should you go bigger? No, that's right. And register a variant. Well, first rule, only register stuff that you need when you need it. Don't register lots of stuff in anticipation that somebody might use it. That does not make the community happy. Register for large community and longevity needs. So for example, if they're within seals and you wanted to clearly identify some dialects because lots of people are going to be working on those dialects, that would be a good example of something that you may want to register. And there's a cost to registering. You have to engage with the community, the wider standards community, for the language tag in order to answer the questions and make everybody happy about, yes, this is a variant that they want to standardize. This is the basic rule of standardization. Everybody thinks it's about being right. It's not. It's about building consensus, typically amongst experts. Obviously, if you're right, that's a very quick way to build consensus. But there's often grey areas where there is no right answer, tick, full marks. And so it's about building a consensus and agreement such that typically everybody gets out of it what they want. How can you help each other? This is very Asian in how standardization works. Okay.
Okay, so let's just say we do a study, right, on this very small sample size, and we actually do a study in New Zealand English, and we actually find out that we have discovered something new. We have a new language, and we want to register it. So, what's the process? Is it like a domain name? Can I just say, oh, I want NZE, let's register NZE, and use it?
So we want to add a code, and we've decided that NZE would work really well, and it happens to be free, unused. So we would contact the ISO 639 registrar, and we would write, there's a form you have to fill in, that basically says, give your reasons why you think there should be a new code for this language.
Yeah, okay, well I can definitely do that. We live off the end of the world, nobody understands me, I don't understand them. I think I'm speaking a pretty much different language because I'm from New Zealand. And so I need a language code. I mean, the Maori speakers, like in my town, they have a language code, all for their own use. I think just to be fair that I should have a language code.
Definitely, I think you should.
Absolutely.
So we submit this argument, and do you think it will pass? No, and it shouldn't pass, because it's not really explaining. And if you go to the next slide, here is the criteria, which I'll leave you to read, I'm not going to read them all out, that the ISO 639-3 people have said these are the criteria by which we decide whether something gets a code or not. It's up on the website, you can go and read it, there or not. So, they consider varieties if they've got an inherent understanding of the variety. Common literature probably means that they're the same variety, or varieties of the same language, they're not separate languages. But if they've got distinct ethno-linguistic identity, then maybe they're a separate language. So it's a trick. I mean, you know this. It's tricky working out what's a separate language, and they're trying to do that.
Yes, well, I actually did read this, and I thought, well, we might be called upon to supply some evidence to support our claim for NZE. So, reading that, intelligibility between varieties is marginal. It is certainly marginal. Certainly when we're conversing at speed, it's very marginal.
Definitely, yes.
And so there seems to be a threshold of around about 70%. So what we did is we went and we recorded a word list and we had it transcribed by an expert linguist into IPA. Then we ran it through some software called COB, which is really good at analysing this sort of thing. We used the Blair method and came up with an answer. Yes, that's what we
A
just did.
lexical similarity of less than 70%. Wow. So we've got this. There's also been many studies of New Zealand English, so clearly it's a different language because there's lots of studies on it. And there are publications. Here's one publication, it's a very good publication, Christchurch is Monted. But unfortunate for them. What does it mean, by the way? Because I don't know.
I think in that context it means earthquake.
Okay.
Okay, so here's our evidence. We have this extensive word list over here that you can see on the left that we've recorded in IBA. I'll just leave you to read that as quickly as you can. And then we put it through COG. And what we found is that between English, as spoken by our English sample over here, and the New Zealand English as spoken by myself, we only have 65%.
Yeah. Oh well, so yeah, it's clearly a different language. Yeah.
So I think we have some evidence
Yes.
that we could actually put in
So
support.
we should submit that then. So we submit that.
Just as an aside here on COG, COG is really quite useful for comparing variants, but you do need to use it wisely, and this wouldn't necessarily constitute wise use of this tool.
This was a very carefully selected word list, we would
Yes.
hasten to add,
As I'm sure you can see.
as you can probably tell if you start reading it.
But even in the course of doing this somewhat facetious exercise, we did actually find that COG was able to pull out some very interesting information. For example, it determined that chicken and chook were likely cognate, which was kind of cool, because they actually are. Yet sausages and bangers are not cognate, which they're likely not. So it was actually quite interesting to go and look and see what it did with it.
It's amazing what you can do with junk, isn't it?
Yes, but if you are comparing multiple languages, it's an excellent tool, and we highly recommend it. So there's the website there.
Okay, I don't know what's coming next. Okay, so we've seen that if you want to add a language, you need to provide evidence that this really is a separate language. It's not just, oh, me and my friends think it is, so can we have a code, please? And the hard thing is that the ISO registrar, basically, the poor registrar has to work out, is this guy telling the truth? You know, is it really a separate language or not? And they're not in a position to know. They're just an administrator whose job it is to make sure that people write good proposals and then keep the standard in good shape. So they're desperate for help in assessing this stuff. And I think this is where SEALs can come in. SEALs can act as a community of experts, which is what most ISO standards are founded on, communities of experts. Unicode is built on communities of experts, or a community of experts, who have been doing this encoding game for a while, who know the regions, who know the scripts, who've done the research. And SEALs can provide that community. In addition, I would commend it to give advice on how to tag. If you get stuck and you're going, well, how should I tag this? Go into a wider community of people who have been playing this game for a while. You can get some help. They can help, whoops, go back. They can help with registrations as they're needed. So if, rather than going, oh, I need to work through this whole process and submit straight to ISO 639, they may decide that it would be better to relate to somebody in the region who can help them to explain and understand the complexities of the region to help them to write the proposal, and then may propose it for them. And they can provide domain expertise to ISO 639, saying, we can help you assess stuff for Southeast Asia. Okay, so going on to the next slide, which is the last slide, I think. I would commend these as roles that SEALs could provide, or actually what that sub-community might do. One is it takes a long time to really understand a particular standard and the standards involved. It can take years, really, to understand how do you make that standard as good as possible, that is protecting the standard, making a good standard with a good integrity that is useful to its users, understanding the It's all the different stakeholders. It's not just linguists who are stakeholders in ISO 639. Computing is a huge stakeholder in ISO 639, and they got a lot of money, and they speak very loudly. So learning to work with them would be a very good skill to have. So learning and understanding how to relate to the standards bodies, how to engage, how to serve, how to understand the standards well, is something that you'll gain with time, and the best way is through engagement. We talked about some various ontologies. Maybe there are some ontologies that need to be developed here in Southeast Asia for language tagging. And that's something that SEALs could definitely help with. Educating users. New linguist comes onto the block, they've got to start tagging data. How do they tag wisely? How do they handle some of the complexities of dialects and dialectal variation and things that are going on? I don't know what the questions are. I'm not a linguist, I'm just thinking off the top of my head. You know what the kinds of questions are that you've got to answer. Support registration applications, I said that one. Assess as well, assessing those registration applications. And also, because you have the relationships, relate to experts outside the immediate community so that you can find expertise. So I would commend these actions to you as SEALs and say, what you're planning to do is a great thing. I think it's going to be great, and I encourage you in it. And I wish you every success in all that you do. Thank you. Now, are there any questions? And if you are asking questions about New Zealand English, you have to do it in the keeping of the presentation. Let's go radio mic. We got radio mic.
Care less about New Zealand.
What?
All right, so you talk about language tagging. My immediate thought is, all right, I'm Joe Blow working on Northern Pokaren, and what does this look like day to day in what I'm doing?
Okay, so you've got some Northern Poke data, and you decide that you want to tag this because you want to be able to associate maybe some linguistic resources with it. So first of all, you have to work out how vague can I be? Can I just say it's correct? No, probably not. Can I say it's po-correct? No, probably not. So we need to get down to Northern Pokaren. Now I don't know enough about, is there an ISO 639 code for Northern Pokaren?
Yes.
Okay, so you can use that. Bing! And then you can say, well, which script am I using? Because I know for certain that Northern Pokaren has quite a few options. So let's say it's going to be Thai script. Okay, so we go dash Thai. But I also happen to know that there's more than one Thai script for Northern Po. Is that right?
No, you're getting it mixed up with Eastern Pokaren.
Okay, well let's
They
pretend
only
there are
have
more.
one.
Well, let's pretend there's more,
Okay.
just to make it harder. And that there's two orthographies for Thai orthographies. How do we tag to say which of those two orthographies? Now, you could go and register a variant with the IETF and the whole language tag thing, or you can use a private use tag, just do -X, and then make up your own name for the two orthographies. And I would say, if you're starting today, I'd say do that first. Then if there's a growing community of people who are using that, you would then say, we really need to register this. And the question then is, do you go through it all the way going on to international, or the moment, the only option is go all the way to the language tag people to do that. But that's an upheaval. You have to join the language tag list, read copious discussions that go on there, and engage and fill in the form and all the rest of it. Well, that may be enough. And in fact, for something as small, actually the smaller the thing, the easier it is. So you could say there are two orthographies, Thai orthographies for Eastern Po. I would like to register these two variants to distinguish them because it's used.
And I would say, like, if you're using some tools, like, for example, Fieldworks Language Explorer, or WeSay, or in fact, any SIL tool, we've baked this understanding of BCP 47 is baked into all the tools. So when you go and use your writing system setup dialog box, it provides you with a nice language selection that you can choose and kind of guides you through this process. But it's actually forming a perfectly valid BCP 47 tag for you and guiding you through that process. So what we've described here is maybe your software doesn't support that tag, and you've got something else, how should you tag it appropriately? Well, this is how. But many tools are embracing the standard as well. So you'll probably be using some kind of tool that already tags it for you.
And I just want to go backward on what I just said, because one of the options open to you is to say, okay, let's take Eastern Po, and it's 2 Thai scripts. Are those 2 Thai scripts distinguished by region? Is it a Thai script used in one country versus another country? Because in that case, you can use a region tag to distinguish them. You could say Eastern Po, Thai script, Thailand, Eastern Po, Thai script, Burma. And just use the region tag to distinguish them, not have to come up with a variant. Okay, do you want to come back on? I saw you hovering. You'd like to come back. We will get to you, don't worry.
Yeah. Okay. So I can see how you're using these tags in Flex. 2 questions. In Flex, how can you extend that? So there's at least 3 dialects in Northern Po.
Okay, so we need a dialect variation, and we potentially need an orthography variation.
And then, how are you using, for example, if I'm using LibreOffice, how would I use this tagging capability?
Okay, so I showed you one way of cutting the pie. I'll let you.
I can answer the UI question.
Yeah, I'll do the first bit, you do the second bit. So you can cut the pie orthography-wise, or we can cut the pie dialectally. And again, dialects are variants really, and you should really register them. But while they're not registered, you can use a private use extension and put whatever you like after there, and tag and differentiate by dialect using that.
Yeah, and in the case of Flex, we say in other SIL language tools, we've taken a little bit of a shortcut because currently the standardized ISO variants aren't really linguistic variants. They're just other changes that were related to everything else on the left.
They tend to be orthography variants.
Yes, so the approach we took was to conflate the 2, and so we don't have this notion of separate private use, and variant is actually very rarely used. So we allow people to enter into the variant field, a custom variant, and so then you can enter pretty much anything you like we were having examples here of region, TKI, and anything you put in a custom variant will actually come out as -X, custom variant as we described. So in Flex, that's how you do that. As for LibreOffice, I have no idea.
As for LibreOffice, unfortunately, most applications are fairly closed in the set of tags that they really work with. And I would love to spend a year working on LibreOffice and opening it up so that we could have any language and pull locale information from the internet and all that. See, one of the things you can do now that you have a language tag is that you can produce locale information for your Northern Po Thai script, complete with sort order, translations of key terms like languages and regions. You can provide currency information, data information, numbers, and all that sort of information. And you do that, you can then feed that to the industry, and the industry will then may well come out with the next version of Windows having Northern Po Korean supporting it like that. So, but say you do, you got to 11, you want to distinguish these orthographies, you would need to come up with a marking scheme to separate them, and at the moment it would be a private use extension that you would use. And again, it's one of these community building activities. You want to try and encourage other people to use the same tag that you're using. So you may need to publish, these are the private use tags I'm using for these different orthographies. I encourage you to do the same, because if we share, we can benefit from that. And then if there's enough of a community and it becomes established enough, you may decide that you want to push it up to being a full variant. Does that answer your question?
Okay, and the way I sell it to the community, not literally sell it.
The way you sell it to community is assume.
No, so I'm just saying, how do you sell a tag per se, not one particular definition.
The ability to associate linguistic support resources against the string. So, for example, dictionary, spell checking, locale for a language, keyboard, automatic keyboard switching, various other things like that that are associated against the language of a piece of text, is the main benefit to users of having tag data. It's not just an academic exercise. It can be academically useful, but we're too practical to have any academic use. Okay, are there any more questions? Well, thank you very much for coming. I hope you enjoyed it, and you can all go away and learn New Zealand English.